The moment the Korean CEO noticed the bruise, he knew this was no accident. Not a fall. Not clumsiness. And not something he could ignore without consequences. Because helping her would put everything he had built at risk. He didn't stop walking. That was the first thing that shocked her. Most people pretended not to see her. Others saw her but chose silence. But he slowed down. Just slightly. Enough. The hallway of the penthouse was quiet except for the soft hum of the lights. The maid stood near the wall, holding a folded linen sheet against her chest like a shield. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, posture stiff, breathing controlled, too controlled. He caught the mark on her cheek in passing. A shadow of purple beneath carefully applied makeup. His steps faltered. He turned back. And that was the moment her world shifted. She felt his presence before she saw him. The air behind her changed. He stood close, but not touching. Not yet. "Look at me," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. Her fingers tightened around the cloth. "I said, look at me." Slowly, she turned her head. The bruise was worse up close. His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped, not to her face, but to her wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. A faint discoloration. Yellowing. Older. This wasn't new. This was ongoing. He said nothing. And somehow, that terrified her more than shouting ever could. "Before we go further, let me ask you something. When someone with absolute power finally notices your pain, is that salvation, or the beginning of something even more dangerous?" If you're watching this story right now, subscribe. Because this isn't just about what he saw. It's about what he chose to do next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Her name was Amina. She had been working in the CO household for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. She knew this because counting time was the only thing that made the days feel survivable. She cleaned quietly. She spoke only when spoken to. She learned where not to stand, where not to look, and most importantly, what not to reveal. Especially bruises. Especially pain. Especially fear. The man standing behind her was Seo Jae-hyun. Publicly, he was known as a disciplined, cold Korean CEO. The kind business magazines loved to photograph in tailored suits. The kind investors trusted because he never let emotions leak into decisions. Privately, he was known for something else. Control. Nothing in his life happened without intention. Nothing slipped past his attention. Which meant the fact that he was standing here now, staring at a bruise everyone else had ignored, was already a problem. "Who did this?" he asked. Amina's lips parted. Then closed. Her silence stretched. She shook her head once. "No one, sir." It was automatic. Practiced. He studied her for a long moment. Not her words. Her body. The way her shoulders curled inward. The way her feet angled toward the exit. The way her pulse fluttered visibly at her throat. "You're lying," he said quietly. Her breath caught. The hallway felt smaller. This was the part where she usually apologized. Promised it wouldn't happen again. Promised she would be more careful. But this wasn't a supervisor. This was the man who owned the house. The company. The silence. If he pushed further, things could break. "Go finish your shift," he said. Her heart lurched. "Yes, sir." She turned too quickly. The linen slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor. He bent before she could stop him. When his fingers brushed the fabric near her hand, she flinched. Hard. That was all the confirmation he needed. Later that night, Seo Jae-hyun sat alone in his office, city lights bleeding through the glass walls. He replayed the moment again and again. The flinch. The bruise. The lie. He had signed billion-won contracts without blinking. Buried scandals before breakfast. Ruined men with a single phone call. But this was different. Because intervening didn't just mean helping a maid. It meant asking questions. And questions had a way of uncovering truths his household, and his reputation, could not survive. Downstairs, in a small room at the back of the mansion, Amina sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest. She knew what attention from powerful men meant. It never ended well. She stared at her wrist, at the fading bruise, and whispered the words she had learned long ago. Just survive. She didn't know that upstairs, a decision was already forming. One that would expose secrets. One that would redraw power. One that would make her impossible to ignore. And once that happened, there would be no going back. Before this goes any further, if you're watching this and you feel the tension already, subscribe now. Stories like this don't slow down. They only get more dangerous. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because what happens next is the moment everything begins to fracture. Seo Jae-hyun did not sleep that night. Not because of guilt. Not because of sympathy. But because something inside his house was out of order, and disorder was the one thing he never tolerated. At exactly 5:12 a.m., he stood before the glass wall of his office, city lights bleeding into the room. His suit was already pressed. His expression was already sealed. He pressed the intercom. "Bring Amina to the West Wing," he said. Alone. Amina froze when the message reached her. The West Wing wasn't used for staff matters. It was where quiet decisions were made, and consequences followed afterward. She walked the corridor carefully, measuring each step. Fear showed fastest in people who rushed. She had learned that early. The door opened. Seo Jae-hyun was already inside. Standing. Waiting. This time, he didn't speak. He moved slowly around her. Not predatory, not impatient. Observant. The way men studied things before deciding whether they were a liability. "Raise your sleeve," he said. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Sir, I still have duties. Now." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Her fingers shook as she rolled the fabric back just enough. The bruise was older than the one on her face. Yellowed. Almost healed. Which meant it wasn't the first. And not the second. Seo Jae-hyun exhaled through his nose. This wasn't an incident. It was a pattern. He stepped closer. Too close. Her back brushed the wall without her realizing she had moved. "Look at me." She did. And the room seemed to narrow. His hand rose slowly, but stopped just short of her bruised cheek. Not touching. Not comforting. Hovering. Her eyes widened, breath caught halfway in. Fear flickered. Controlled. Contained. Unmistakable. His expression didn't soften. His jaw tightened. His eyes fixed on the bruise, not her gaze. The space between his finger and her skin felt louder than a shout. This wasn't kindness. It was a boundary being tested. "Who," he asked quietly, "believes they can do this in my house?" Her lips parted. No sound came out. Silence stretched. Heavy. Dangerous. "I can end this," he continued. "One word from me." Her voice finally broke through. "If I tell you, they'll kill me." That was the crack. Seo Jae-hyun's hand dropped to his side. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not rage, but calculation. Cold. Precise. "Go," he said. She blinked. "Sir." "Back to your room. Pack nothing. Speak to no one." Confusion flashed across her face. That wasn't a suggestion. She turned and left, heart pounding so violently it hurt. The moment the door closed, Seo Jae-hyun picked up his phone. One call. Then another. By sunrise, 3 things had happened. A security logs were pulled, a staff rotations were frozen, a one name appeared too often to be coincidence. The man responsible wasn't staff. Wasn't family. Wasn't a stranger. He was protected. Which meant touching him would ripple far beyond bruises. Downstairs, Amina sat on her bed, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Being noticed was worse than being invisible. Because now, someone powerful was involved. And powerful men never intervened without collateral damage. She stared at the door, half expecting it to open again. It didn't. But somewhere in the house, a decision had already been made. And once power chose a side, there was no quiet way back. Before we continue, if you're still watching right now, subscribe. This story doesn't reward people who leave early. It punishes them. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because what unfolds next proves that noticing the truth is never the same as surviving it. The first sign that Seo Jae-hyun had made a mistake came at 9:07 a.m. His phone vibrated once on the desk. One message. No greeting. No explanation. Just a name. Director Han. Jae-hyun stared at the screen longer than necessary. Han Min-jun wasn't part of the company's official hierarchy anymore. He hadn't held a title in 3 years. His office had been cleared. His name removed from reports. But power didn't vanish just because it stopped being visible. Han Min-jun was old money, old favors, old threats. And more importantly, he was untouchable. Downstairs, Amina hadn't moved since morning. She sat on the edge of her bed, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. The room was small, quiet, intentionally forgotten. A space designed for people meant to pass through lives without leaving marks. Her suitcase lay open on the floor. Empty. She hadn't packed a single thing. Because leaving required permission. And staying required silence. Both terrified her. Every sound from the hallway made her chest tighten. Every distant footstep felt like a countdown. She replayed the moment again and again. The hovering hand, the stillness, the question he hadn't forced her to answer. Who did this? She hadn't told him. That was supposed to keep her safe. But safety had never followed rules. At 9:15 a.m., Seo Jae-hyun stood in the underground garage, staring at the black sedan he hadn't used in months. He had chosen it deliberately. No driver. No escort. No witnesses. Power announced itself in different ways. Today, discretion mattered more than presence. As the car pulled onto the road, he made another call. Freeze all internal audits, he said. Yes. Immediately. A pause. No. Don't explain why. He hung up before objections could surface. The city moved around him. Glass towers, silent wealth, people unaware of the invisible currents beneath their feet. He had stepped into one of those currents now. And it didn't forgive hesitation. Director Han's office occupied an entire floor of a building that no longer bore his name. The receptionist didn't ask for identification. She didn't announce him. She simply nodded and opened the door. Seo Jae-hyun entered alone. Han Min-jun was seated behind a desk that looked untouched by time. Same leather chair. Same neatly stacked files. Same glass of water placed precisely at the edge of the coaster. He looked up and smiled. Jae-hyun, he said, warmly. You're early. Seo Jae-hyun didn't return the smile. You sent my name, he said. Han leaned back, fingers interlaced. I thought it polite to let you know you were being discussed. By whom? Han tilted his head. By people who don't like disruption. Jae-hyun's gaze hardened. There's abuse happening in my house, he said. You know it. Han's smile didn't fade. That's a serious word. It's accurate. Accuracy, Han replied calmly, depends on perspective. Silence settled between them. Han reached for his glass, took a measured sip. She's a maid, he continued. Not a daughter. Not an asset. Certainly not a priority. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. You touched her, he said. Han's eyes flickered. Just once. Then he laughed softly. Touched, he repeated. Is that what you're calling it now? The room cooled. You've built a reputation on control, Han said. On order. On knowing which problems to erase quietly. He leaned forward. Why this one? For a moment, Seo Jae-hyun said nothing. Because admitting the truth would expose something dangerous. He didn't intervene because he was kind. He intervened because he recognized fear. And fear, once seen, couldn't be unseen. She flinched, Jae-hyun said finally. When no one was touching her. Han studied him. That's it. That's enough. The smile vanished. Careful, Han said. That kind of thinking ruins men like you. At exactly the same time, 2 floors below, Amina heard the knock. 3 sharp taps. Her heart jumped into her throat. The door opened before she could speak. It wasn't Seo Jae-hyun. It was a woman. Tall. Well-dressed. Come. I'm from HR, the woman said smoothly. We need to ask you a few questions. Amina's fingers curled into her palms. HR never came in person. HR never smiled like that. Back in the office, Han stood. You're interfering in something that predates your authority, he said. And you're doing it emotionally. Jae-hyun rose as well. This ends, he said. Han's gaze sharpened. No, he corrected. This continues quietly. Like it always has. He stepped closer. Unless you want your board asking why you're suddenly obsessed with a maid. The word landed like a blade. Obsessed. That was how it would be framed. Concern became fixation. Protection became liability. Jae-hyun understood the language well. You can't protect her, Han said softly. And you can't destroy me. The truth of it settled heavy. Because Han wasn't bluffing. Downstairs, Amina sat across from the HR woman at a small table. Do you feel safe here? The woman asked. Amina hesitated. Yes, she said. The woman nodded, jotting something down. Has anyone made you uncomfortable? A pause. No. Another note. The woman leaned forward slightly. You understand, she said gently, that false accusations can have consequences? Amina's mouth went dry. I didn't accuse anyone. Good, the woman smiled. We'd hate for misunderstandings to escalate. Amina glanced at the door. Can I leave? She asked. Soon. In the office, Han moved back to his desk. I'll give you advice, he said. End this. Return things to order. Let silence do its work. Jae-hyun stared at him. What if I don't? Han's voice dropped. Then she disappears quietly. And your name becomes synonymous with scandal. The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When Seo Jae-hyun left the building, his phone rang immediately. Sir, his assistant said, breathless. There's a situation downstairs. What kind? HR initiated an inquiry without your authorization. Jae-hyun stopped walking. Where is she? A pause. They're still with her. He turned back toward the car. End it, he said. Now. By the time Jae-hyun reached the mansion, Amina was standing alone in the hallway, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The HR woman was gone. The door to the West Wing office was open. Jae-hyun stepped inside. She followed hesitantly. You lied, he said. She looked down. I had to. Why? Because telling the truth makes things worse. The simplicity of it stunned him. She wasn't wrong. Listen to me, he said. What's coming won't be quiet. Her eyes flicked up. They already know you noticed. Fear returned, sharper this time. Then it's too late, she whispered. For both of us. That night, the board scheduled an emergency meeting. Anonymous concerns were raised. Questions were asked. Patterns were suggested. And for the first time since he'd taken control of the company, Seo Jae-hyun realized something terrifying. Power protected itself. And it rarely chose justice. Amina lay awake in the dark, listening to the house settle around her. She had survived by staying small, by staying silent, by never believing protection was real. Now someone had noticed her, and that attention had already started a war. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow something would break. She didn't know whether it would be her or him. Before we go any further, if you're still watching, comment where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because from this point forward, silence stops being protection and starts becoming a weapon. The emergency board meeting wasn't announced publicly. No assistants, no press, no official agenda. Just a calendar block labeled Internal Review. Seo Jae-hyun recognized the tactic immediately. When institutions wanted to destroy someone quietly, they never used loud words. They used neutral ones. The conference room felt colder than usual. Not physically, but socially. Men who had once greeted him with familiarity now nodded stiffly. Some avoided his eyes altogether. Others watched him too closely, as if waiting for him to slip. Director Han was not there. That absence pressed harder than his presence ever could. The chairman cleared his throat. "We'll keep this brief," he said. Seo Jae-hyun remained standing. He didn't sit unless invited. "And we didn't invite him here to be comfortable," someone murmured under their breath. The chairman continued. "We've received concerns regarding your recent conduct." "Concerns from whom?" Jae-hyun asked calmly. The chairman didn't answer directly. "Multiple sources," he said instead. That told him everything. Another board member slid a folder across the table. No label. No company seal. Just paper. Seo Jae-hyun didn't touch it immediately. "Open it," the chairman said. He did. Photos. Grainy. Cropped. Taken from distance and shadow. Him standing in the West Wing hallway. Amina behind him, partially obscured. Another image. Her entering his office late at night. No context. No timestamps. Just implication. "You're aware," the chairman said carefully, "that power imbalance relationships are sensitive." Seo Jae-hyun closed the folder. "These images prove nothing." "They prove proximity," another member replied. "And perception is often more damaging than truth." That was the point. Truth required defense. Perception only needed repetition. "At this time," the chairman said, "we believe it's best you step back from day-to-day operations." A pause. "Until matters are clarified." Seo Jae-hyun exhaled slowly. "This is a removal," he said. "It's a precaution," the chairman corrected. Seo Jae-hyun looked around the table. Not one man disagreed. Fear had already done its work. At the mansion, Amina felt the shift long before anyone spoke to her. The house moved differently. Staff conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Security guards lingered longer than necessary. Her name disappeared from duty rosters. She had been erased from function, but not from attention. That was worse. She stood in the kitchen holding a tray she hadn't been asked to carry. No one told her where to go. No one told her to leave. The silence wrapped around her like a warning. Back at the company, Seo Jae-hyun stood alone in his office after the meeting. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from executives, legal counsel, PR advisors, all carefully worded, all urging distance. Not from wrongdoing, from her. When he returned home that evening, the mansion lights were dimmer than usual. Not off, just subdued, as if the house itself was trying not to be noticed. Amina stood near the staircase, hands folded tightly in front of her. She looked smaller than before. Not physically, emotionally. "They asked me questions today," she said softly. His chest tightened. "Who?" "People who smiled too much. HR again. Or something worse." "They wanted names," she continued. "Dates. Places." He said nothing, because denial no longer protected anyone. "They're preparing something," he said finally. Amina swallowed. "Against me. Against us," he corrected. Her breath stuttered. That single word changed everything. Later that night, the power went out. Not the city. Just the estate. Lights snapped off in sequence. Emergency illumination flickered on, bathing the hallways in dim amber. Security radios crackled. "Sir," a voice said urgently, "we have unauthorized access at the East Gate." Seo Jae-hyun's instincts sharpened. This wasn't an accident. This was escalation. He moved immediately, placing himself between Amina and the corridor. "Stay here," he said. Footsteps echoed. Measured. Unhurried. People who knew they belonged. A door opened down the hall. Soft laughter followed. "Impressive security," a familiar voice said. "You've improved." Director Han stepped into the emergency light, coat immaculate, expression relaxed. "You crossed a line," Seo Jae-hyun said. Han smiled faintly. No, he replied. You did. I just followed you. Amina stood frozen behind him. Han's gaze slid to her. There she is, he said casually. The reason for all this inconvenience. Amina felt heat rush to her face. Shame, fear, anger, all layered together. She's not your concern, Seo Jaehyun said. Han tilted his head. She is exactly my concern. This is how it ends, Han continued. You step back. The house returns to order. And she disappears quietly. Amina's heart pounded. Disappear meant many things. None of them safe. I'll go, she said suddenly. Both men turned. Her voice shook, but she stood straight. If I leave, this stops, she said. Doesn't it? Han smiled. Seo Jaehyun felt something break. This was how power survived. By convincing the vulnerable to sacrifice themselves. He reached for her, then stopped. Because touching her now would be framed as guilt. Because hesitation had become evidence. The future narrowed to a single breath. Amina met his eyes. I don't want to be the reason you fall, she said. And in that moment, Seo Jaehyun understood the cruelty of the trap. Saving her would destroy him. Letting her go would destroy her. And the system would remain untouched either way. Before we go any further, if you're still watching, subscribe now. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happens here divides the story into before and after. There is no reset after this. Amina left the mansion before dawn. Not escorted. Not chased. Not officially dismissed. She walked out the same way she had arrived months ago, quietly, carrying nothing but the small bag she had packed in secret long before anyone noticed her. The gates opened without resistance. That was the first warning. When power wanted you gone, it never made a scene. Seo Jaehyun watched from the upper floor as her figure disappeared into the fog beyond the estate walls. He did not wave. He did not stop her. He stood perfectly still, hands braced against the glass. Because if he moved now, if he followed, everything they had already prepared would accelerate. Han had been very clear. Leave the system untouched, and the system will leave you alive. By mid-morning, the board issued a statement. Short, neutral, bloodless. CEO Seo Jaehyun has voluntarily stepped back from operational duties pending an internal review. Voluntarily. That single word rewrote reality. The media accepted it without question. Markets dipped, then stabilized. Order was restored. Amina sat in a crowded bus at the edge of the city, staring out the window at buildings she didn't recognize. Her phone buzzed once. An unknown number. She didn't answer. She had learned what answering unknown calls meant. Back at the company, Seo Jaehyun's access was restricted. Not revoked. Restricted. A courtesy. A leash. His office still bore his name, but his authority had been hollowed out quietly. Assistants spoke carefully. Executives checked with legal before answering him. He had been transformed from power into liability. Exactly as planned. That evening, Director Han arrived unannounced. Not at the office. At Seo Jaehyun's private residence. Efficient, Han remarked, surveying the dim interior. She left without incident. You wanted her gone, Jaehyun replied. She's gone. Han smiled. Yes. But I didn't say this was over. Han moved closer, voice lowering. You see, he continued, systems don't forgive exposure attempts. They correct them. Jaehyun's gaze hardened. You think this ends quietly? It already has, Han said. For her. The implication hung heavy. Across the city, Amina stepped off the bus near a shelter she had memorized weeks ago. Not because she planned to run. Because planning was the only control she had ever been allowed. As she reached the door, someone spoke behind her. Amina. Her blood went cold. She turned slowly. The HR woman. Same smile. Different coat. You didn't think leaving the house meant leaving the story, did you? The woman asked gently. Back at the residence, Seo Jae-hyun finally spoke the words he had been holding back. You touched her. Han's expression shifted. Barely. You noticed too late, he replied. That was confirmation enough. Seo Jae-hyun understood then that silence had never protected anyone. It had only delayed consequences. At the shelter, Amina was escorted inside. Not forcibly. Politely. Every door closed behind her with practiced inevitability. You'll stay here for a while, the HR woman said. It's for your own good. Amina's hands trembled. I didn't accuse anyone, she whispered. No, the woman agreed. But you were noticed. That was worse. That night, Seo Jae-hyun sat alone in his study, documents spread across the desk. Security logs. Internal emails. Financial transfers masked as bonuses. A pattern. A network. Han wasn't alone. He never had been. He made a call. Not to legal. Not to PR. To someone the company had paid for years to keep silent. I'm ready, he said. On the other end, a pause. Then understand this, the voice replied. Once this starts, you won't be able to stop it. I don't intend to. At the shelter, Amina lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She had traded visibility for survival. Or so she thought. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message. You were right to be afraid. Her breath caught. Another message followed. But you weren't wrong to be seen. She didn't recognize the number. But something in her chest shifted. Not relief. Resolve. By morning, leaks began appearing online. Anonymous. Carefully sourced. Impossible to trace back to one hand. Whispers at first. Then names. Then dates. The system shuddered. Director Han watched the news in silence as familiar phrases appeared on screen. Alleged misconduct. Historical abuse of power. Internal cover-ups. His phone rang. Once. Twice. Too many times. He smiled thinly. So, he murmured. He chose fire. Amina sat up as staff at the shelter rushed past her room, voices tense. Televisions blared in the common area. Her name wasn't mentioned. But the story was. And for the first time, she understood. Leaving the house had not ended her role. It had changed it. Seo Jae-hyun stood in his darkened office as dawn broke. He had sacrificed his position, his reputation, his safety. But the system had underestimated one thing. Silence breaks differently when the powerless stop carrying it alone. Before we continue, subscribe now. Because stories like this don't end quietly, and neither does the truth. And let me ask you this. If exposing the truth could cost you your life, would you still do it? Tell me what you think in the comments, and don't forget to say where you're watching from. By noon, the system was no longer calm. It was scrambling. The leaks hadn't come from one source. That was the first mistake they made in trying to contain it. They assumed a whistleblower. A single weak link. Someone to isolate, threaten, silence. But this was worse. This was a network unraveling. Seo Jae-hyun watched the internal dashboards flicker from green to yellow to red. Crisis alerts stacked on his screen. Keywords flagged. Legal risk assessments updating in real time. Board members requesting emergency calls they had refused him just days earlier. The same men who had pushed him aside were suddenly unsure who held the knife. He didn't answer them. Not yet. Across the city, Director Han sat in a private room at a members-only club, staring at his phone as message after message went unanswered. Fixers weren't calling back. Lawyers were suddenly unavailable. Even old allies were choosing silence. Power, he realized too late, only protected itself while it was profitable. At the shelter, Amina felt the shift before she saw it. The staff had stopped smiling. Phones rang constantly. Doors that were once open now stayed shut. A television played in the common area, volume low, captions scrolling fast. She caught her reflection in the dark screen. She didn't recognize herself. Not because she looked different. Because she wasn't invisible anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, she answered. Listen carefully, a woman's voice said. Come. Professional. Urgent. They're trying to identify you as the source. Amina's heart raced. I didn't say anything, she whispered. I know, the voice replied. That's not the point. Back at the company, the board reconvened, this time with lawyers present. The tone had changed. No accusations. No folders slid across the table. Only one question repeated in different forms. How bad is this going to get? Seo Jae-hyun sat at the end of the table, invited back not out of respect, but necessity. You knew, one board member said carefully. Before all this surfaced. Yes, Jae-hyun replied. And you didn't report it. No, he said again. I intervened. Silence followed. That distinction frightened them more than denial ever could. At the club, Director Han finally received a call. Your name is trending, the voice said flatly. They've connected you to 3 settlements. Han closed his eyes. Contain it, he said. A pause. That won't be possible, the voice replied. Someone's feeding them internal documents. Han's jaw tightened. There's no paper trail, he snapped. There is now. Amina was escorted into a small office at the shelter. 2 people waited for her. Not HR this time. Legal. We need you to remain here, one of them said gently. For your safety. For whose safety? Amina asked. They didn't answer. That was answer enough. Seo Jae-hyun stood alone afterward in the hallway outside the boardroom. The building felt different. Not hostile. Uncertain. Power didn't like uncertainty. It made people careless. His phone vibrated. A message. They're looking for her. He typed back once. They won't find her. That wasn't confidence. That was commitment. That night, the first name fell publicly. Not Hans. A proxy. A senior executive whose role had been to smooth complaints into silence. The headline spread fast. The public needed blood. The system offered a vein. At the shelter, Amina watched the news with shaking hands. She recognized the name. Recognized the face. He had once told her to be patient. Her breath caught. This was real now. Director Han stood in his penthouse, lights off, city glowing beneath him. The calls had stopped. That was the worst part. Silence no longer meant control. It meant abandonment. He poured himself a drink he didn't touch. For the first time in decades, the system wasn't responding to him. It was protecting itself from him. Seo Jae-hyun made the final call just before midnight. They'll come for you, the voice on the other end warned. They'll try to discredit her. Let them try, Jae-hyun said. And you? The voice asked. He looked out at the city. They already took everything that mattered. At the shelter, Amina lay awake as footsteps echoed in the hall. A knock. Firm. Official. She sat up, heart pounding. This time, she didn't flinch. She stood. She opened the door. By morning, the headline changed. Not allegations. Charges. Not whispers. Evidence. Director Han's name finally surfaced, attached to numbers, dates, patterns that could no longer be explained away. The system had chosen its scapegoat. And it had chosen too late. Seo Jae-hyun watched the news silently. He didn't feel victorious. He felt exposed. Because when the truth comes out, it doesn't stop at the guilty. It burns everyone nearby. Amina stepped outside the shelter for the first time in days. The air felt different. Not safe. But honest. Her phone buzzed. A message from the same unknown number. It's not over. But you're no longer alone. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she believed it. The system was panicking. And panic made powerful men reckless. Which meant the final move was coming. Before the end, if you stayed this far, subscribe. And answer this honestly in the comments. Was what he did justice? Or just another kind of sacrifice? Tell me where you're watching from, too. Because this ending isn't simple. It's not meant to be. The arrest happened at 6:41 a.m. No cameras were allowed inside the building. No statements were prepared in advance. Director Han Min-jun was escorted through a private exit, coat draped carefully over his shoulders, cuffs hidden from public view. The system still tried to protect his dignity, even as it dismantled him. Power always did. But dignity couldn't stop evidence. By noon, the board issued a second statement. This one longer, more careful, filled with words like accountability, oversight, failure of safeguards. Names were mentioned now. Not all of them. Never all. But enough to satisfy the public appetite for justice. Markets stabilized again. They always did. Seo Jae-hyun read the statement alone. He was no longer CEO. That title had been stripped quietly the night before. No vote, no farewell. Just a legal notice sent at 2:13 a.m. He didn't contest it. He had already decided what mattered. Amina watched the news from a small apartment arranged by people she still didn't fully trust. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled in. The television volume was low, captions scrolling fast. Han's face appeared briefly, then disappeared. Just like that. Years of fear reduced to a headline. She felt no relief, only exhaustion. Her phone rang. This time, a name appeared. Seo Jae-hyun. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. Yes, she said. I won't contact you again after this, he said quietly. She believed him. They're offering me silence in exchange for distance, he continued. No charges. No protection. Just disappearance. She closed her eyes. That's what they always offer, she replied. A pause. I refused. Her breath caught. Why? She asked. Because silence was the currency that bought all of this, he said. And I've spent enough of it. She didn't thank him. This wasn't a favor. It was a cost already paid. Later that day, Amina was escorted into a government office. Not as a suspect, not as a witness on display. As a protected participant. The language mattered. For the first time, the system used words that didn't erase her. She signed documents slowly, deliberately. Each page felt heavier than the last. At the end, she hesitated. Will it really change? She asked. The official didn't lie. It will change some things, she said. Not everything. That honesty mattered more than promises. Seo Jae-hyun packed his office himself. No assistants. No boxes labeled personal. Just files he was allowed to take and memories he wasn't. As he stepped out for the last time, a junior employee bowed instinctively. Seo Jae-hyun nodded back. That was it. Power ended not with collapse, but with quiet exits. Weeks passed. The story moved on, as stories always did. Another scandal replaced it. Another name trended. But some changes lingered. Audits tightened. Settlements reopened. Silence became riskier. Not impossible, but riskier. Amina began working again. Not as a maid. Not as someone invisible. She took a job at a small nonprofit, answering phones, filing reports, learning how systems were built and how they broke. Some nights, she still flinched at sudden movements. Some mornings, she still checked exits first. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in permissions. One evening, she received a letter. No return address. Inside, a single line written neatly. Being seen should never have been dangerous. She folded the paper carefully. She didn't need to guess who sent it. Seo Jae-hyun left the country quietly. No exile. No exile announcement. Just absence. He took no board seat elsewhere. Gave no interviews. Rejected every offer to rebuild his legacy. Some men spent their lives chasing redemption. He chose something else. Responsibility. Years later, when the case was referenced in textbooks and panel discussions, Amina's name appeared only once. Not as a victim. As a catalyst. That mattered. Justice didn't arrive clean. It never did. It arrived fractured. Incomplete. Costly. But it arrived. And for the first time in her life, Amina knew this truth. Survival was no longer her only role. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. Some truths deserve to be told all the way to the end.